segment is going to discuss the yard area on shoreline properties. Most of us pride ourselves in lawn and garden maintenance, and it doesn't change when we have waterfront property. It's great to be proud of your property and spend time maintaining it, but the yard can be a major source of surface water contamination as well as contribute to erosion if it's not managed properly. Major topics we'll consider in this section are you planning development on your shoreline? Do you use pesticides and fertilizers on the property? What is the potential for runoff to make its way to the lake, and how can we minimize this risk? And how can features such as driveways and pools influence lake health? So this is just generally the living area. Normally it's landscaped in some way, and it'll be like from the house kind of down to the buffer, wherever the buffer might be. So in our case, that would be this main area right here, where he's kind of landscaped and everything. So you would ask him if he was planning any future clearing or development on the shoreline. And the reason that you ask him this is because if he is, then it's a great opportunity for you to give them tips and that kind of thing to make sure that they have the most useful information that they can have. And so if yes, if no, then whatever, we just give them tips. So what portion of the property's yard is composed of lawn, would you guys say?
Small section.
Because is the edge here, is that property line about?
Yeah.
Okay, so then
And then to the front, yeah. Or to the back.
Maybe 35?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So probably, yeah, somewhere maybe on the low end of half, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Small section.
So, yeah.
So what do you notice about the lawn, though?
It's not just one species of grass. We've let the trifolium grow in and other grass species.
Yeah, so why, is that good or is that bad?
It's good because it means he hasn't picked out one grass species and isn't using certain pesticides to target one species. He's letting a whole ecosystem grow rather than fostering monoculture.
Yeah, and so likely these native ground covers have more extensive root systems too, which means that his lawn is going to be a lot more capable of absorbing runoff than than just lawn turf grass would. Okay, so you would ask him, is he using pesticides or in the yard or garden, and is he using fertilizers in the yard or garden? So obviously, what type of suggestions would you make for pesticides and fertilizers?
If they're willing to discontinue using them, that's great. If not, you'll have to be like, okay, let's look at these alternative pesticides idea that are non-toxic or low toxic, and if you have to fertilize, don't use any phosphorus in the fertilizer, or maybe try corn gluten instead.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just figuring out how often they do it, why they do it, what are they targeting. That will help you make informed suggestions based on what you think they're actually willing to do and what will make kind of like a compromise of what will work for them and what will work for us in terms of our goal of lake health. So something then you have to assess is the potential for the runoff from the yard and the garden to the lake. So what would you guys say for this property?
If the potential is high to run off, but they do have a fairly good buffer zone of vegetation along the way down.
So the potential's high, but it's been...
Yeah, so when we think about this question, you should think about it in the context of what are the chances that contaminated water from here is going to reach the lake?
Oh, maybe minor.
And then it would...
Minor to moderate, maybe.
Yeah, so that's the best way to think about that question, just because that's essentially what we're looking to ask is okay, surface water from rain is going to have contaminants. There's nothing you can do about that. If it's not from your property, maybe from someone else's property. So what is the potential that on your property that contaminated water is going to reach the lake? And for him, yeah, it's probably pretty minor because he's left this dense forest in place here. So if it was someone who had turf grass to the water's edge, then that would probably be high. So really that question is what kind of a buffer zone do they have, more or less. Okay, so now we're back in the house section, and we're going to quickly talk about roof runoff. And I'm using our LbyW consultation form that we now have online. So I'm using the iPad to enter the data. So it's kind of like a trial run for the iPad, and we're just going to chat quickly about roof runoff. So when you guys are on the property in the yard, it's in the house section, so you can do it with the house or you can do it with the yard. It's really up to you. But so what you have to try to assess is the erosion potential from the roof runoff. So first thing you need to do is find where the roof runoff is coming out. So you just look at their property and try to find where their downspouts are. So can you guys see his?
There's one over there.
Okay, do you guys want to walk over there quickly and see what's going on? Okay, so now that you guys have looked at the downspouts, what would you say is the erosion potential? So that's kind of like what is the chances of it eroding his property, and also what's the chance of that contributing to the shoreline erosion.
I'd say probably very minor.
Why?
Both downspouts on the front and back of the house are directed into dense vegetation.
Why does that help with mitigating erosion potential?
Dense vegetation can help absorb excess water.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe if they don't have dense vegetation, what's something that you could suggest to them?
A rain barrel.
Yeah.
Or even like make little like rock paths to like divert it off the main area, and then it gives it time to percolate through the rocks.
Definitely, yeah.
Close it down.
So, you know, we saw some properties before that have some pretty aesthetically pleasing diversions of their eaves. So you can make it look pretty, like, you know, it kind of looks like a little waterfall or something. So you can make some suggestions based on like what you think is important to them on their property. But I would definitely agree with you guys that it's minor on this property. Or maybe even none. So do they have the rain barrels or the spouts directed to dense vegetation, you'd say?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, if they didn't, you would just give them some suggestions and let them know what the implications of the downspout runoff are, what the perks of having a rain barrel might be. And then we're going to move on to driveway. And we're just going to kind of assess the impact of runoff from maybe the road or from other properties to the lake based on Stephen's property. So the first thing you're going to look at is the driveway composition. So what are you guys noticing?
Gravel.
Okay. So you would say gravel, and then maybe in other you would say densely compacted or something like that. You would just make a note that it is pretty compacted. So, you know, in terms of protecting from runoff, what do you think about this type of driveway?
It'd be better if it was loose gravel.
How come?
Just because then water runoff can percolate down through the gravel where dense makes it more of a hardened structure.
Yeah.
A good thing, even though it is compacted, it's fairly flat. It's not like a big steep driveway, so like the runoff potential that way, it's a flat surface.
Definitely. And what do you notice about the shape of the driveway?
It's curved, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and it's interspersed with pretty dense vegetation, so it's going to stop quite a bit of the water, and hopefully some of it would percolate it down. Okay, so then you have to assess based on what you know about the entire property. So you know that this road is curved, you know that there's dense vegetation, there's some lawn, but there's also some native grasses growing in, and there's a fairly dense buffer. So what do you think about the potential for runoff from the road and driveway to make it to the lake?
I'd say none's minor.
Yeah. Just because, yeah, I mean, like, you know, it's going to come from the road, it's going to have all these contaminants in it, but, you know, some of that is going to percolate down into this gravel. Some of it is going to be absorbed by the trees here. Some of it will be on the lawn, so not as good as potential, but some of those are native grasses, so more will be absorbed. And then it's going to go through the yard, it's going to hit the buffer, and, you know, whatever's left of it is going to probably mostly be absorbed by the buffer. So, yeah, probably very little of that is going to, but if any of those aspects are missing, then it's going to change your assessment of it. So you need to consider the whole property when kind of making this decision. So just like when you're in the yard and you're trying to decide what the potential is from the yard, you need to consider the yard plus the buffer zone. So when you get here, you need to consider, you know, this part, the back, plus the road, plus the yard, plus the buffer zone, because these are all incremental steps in kind of protecting the shoreline from erosion. And then, yeah, that's pretty much all you have to look at on the driveway. So just, you know, what you're going to see, like what if it was cement? What would you guys think about that?
It'd have a higher erosion, or not erosion, runoff potential.
Yeah, so how could you kind of mitigate that?
Planting plants along the side of it.
Yeah, definitely. And so sometimes people just have like vegetation that they just drive over, and that's a good alternative.
Like a dirt road, sort of.
Yeah.
Or they just drive onto the lawn.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, okay, so yeah, that's it for driveway. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, perfect.